Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to wherever you are watching this from. My name is Peter Jones. I'm one of the directors at B-Sides Exeter, one of many community-driven events as part of the wider international B-Sides family. Exeter being the first one for us this year in July. Welcome to the keynote that never happened on about become a better security engineer. I'm not going to steal Stuart's thunder because he's all ready to do the introduction. We are recording this section, and there is also going to be an option for Q&A. So in Teams, you've got a feature for adding questions throughout the talk, and Adam and Liam will be the hostess with the mostest, going through the questions to ask Kane at the end of the talk. This year's event was beyond our wildest dreams. It was the focus about bringing the cyber community together from Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, and to Dorset, and to the wider cyber community. We met lots of amazing people, and on the day was incredibly busy. We've also got a very busy Discord server, which is running 365, so please come and join it. It's getting busier every day. Big shout out, and probably the last shout out we'll be end up doing to our 2024 sponsors. Without you, this event was never going to be possible. We do have our 2025 guide ready. And all you got to do is go to sponsorship.bsidesexeter.co.uk. So, without further ado, over to you, Stuart.
No worries. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I'm Stuart, one of the other directors at B-Sides, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Kane. He's a good friend of mine from Devon. He's lived all over the world, including Australia, Canada, and is now currently all the way over in New Zealand. He traveled over for B-Sides Exeter this year, all the way over from New Zealand, literally to wake up on the day, not being able to speak. So that was a real shame, but very glad that we can have this keynote afterwards. So Kane's been in the industry for over a decade now, with starting off in digital forensics, worked in places like the Serious Fraud Office, and has worked for huge companies like Allison, Shopify, and is currently the head of enterprise security at Canva. And well, over those years, Kane, his favorite topic, and built quite a reputation about it, is zero trust security. He's super knowledgeable in the area, so if you ever want to speak to him about it, I'm sure he'll love to do that. So yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Kane. He's here today to tell us about how to be a better security engineer. So Kane, over to you.
Sure thing. You're stealing some of my thunder here. We'll be talking about some of this stuff as we go. But just let me share my screen. Should all be able to see that, hopefully. And then I will dive into it. So yeah, this is a bit of an esoteric talk, but you find a lot of career talks are about getting into security or getting into your first management position, and they often propose the sort of very typical career path as a ladder or a set of stairs, you know, where you're kind of always on the up. But that's not really how real life works. And you'll hear the term like career jungle gym thrown around a lot, I find, in 2024. People move around and do stuff. And so this talk is maybe how to embrace that, or how to better embrace the jungle gym. And so basically, we're going to be talking about a little bit around the security industry. First of all, just to understand what we do, because often we don't reflect. The second, we're going to be looking at what I'm going to be calling multiclassing. And yes, there's going to be a lot of Dungeons and Dragons references in this. And then I'm going to be talking about some guidance on, like I say, how you can better embrace that model. So I'll do a quick introduction. As Stu said, this talk was supposed to be in person, and woke up on the day with the flu, couldn't speak for more than 5 minutes. And so I think I've learned my lesson in that if I'm going to do talks, do them literally the day after you arrive. Don't wait a few days because it's pretty gnarly out there in 2024. But yeah, as Stu kind of talked about, like I've moved around a lot. I lived in Exeter for about the first 18 years of my life. And so it was very exciting to come back, even if I didn't have as much time to spend there as I wanted. But since then, I've been in a decent few roles, decent few companies, and we'll be diving into a little bit about my story and a few other people's as well as we go. Now, before we start, a lot of people have this this vision of New Zealand as like exotic landscapes and mountainous backgrounds and rainforests and that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, it is like if you go to the South Island, you'll get views like this. Like this is Marlborough Sound down in the very south, sort of southwest side of the island. But growing up in Devon, you kind of just see sheep and hills, to be honest. And my friends, especially Stu, like to make fun of me these days because I moved to the North Island of New Zealand, which actually just looks like this. So I pretty much moved to the other side of the world to get the exact same view, if not with a few more sheep this time. And I do think it's funny because J.R. Tolkien based most of Lord of the Rings around the English countryside. So of course, when they go to film the movies, they filmed it in the North Island in New Zealand, as you do. And so, with that over, we'll be talking about the security industry, and this is probably something that a lot of people don't understand or don't reflect on. But security is a horizontal, not a vertical. What do I mean by that? So I've taken this from my good friend Ross in his blog. But security is across industry. And so it's across technology, it's across customer. And it will look very different depending on each one of these verticals that you cross. So if you do GRC for the UK government, your job is going to be quite different to like a German hospital, or an American bank, that kind of thing. So there's different things you're going to care about. There's different ways you're going to approach it. And there's going to just sort of be a different culture involved in that. And so when you enter the security industry, you'll see job posts like this: AppSec engineer, GRC manager, DNR analyst, that kind of thing. And it leads you to believe as a new person, like, these are the paths. This is what you do. They're all the same. You can easily move across all of them. But when companies are hiring, they're hiring not just for security, the horizontal, they're also hiring for the vertical too. And so what they actually want is something like this. They're looking for an incident responder with SaaS experience. They're looking for an AppSec engineer with very specific language skills. And so what this finds is that you'll kind of find groups of security cultures. You will find pen testers and consultancies tend to group together. You'll find sort of security engineers at SaaS companies tend to stick together. They all kind of move between the same companies, and occasionally they might jump, but usually requires a bit of work on their part. And so, like I say, when companies are looking to hire, they are looking for the best risk-free approach. Like, it's kind of harsh to say it, but it's reality. They don't want to train people up. They want someone who can go on day one. If you could be that person, you're going to have a much better time than someone who needs to get into the role, assuming that you're not a junior. And so a great way to visualize this hiring is with a chart. On the x-axis, we have security skills, and on the y-axis, we have security-specific knowledge. And so I'm going to go through each quadrant. I'm going to kind of talk about what a hire in that bracket would mean. So the best hire for the role, the perfect candidate, is going to have strong security skills, and they're going to have high industry knowledge. And so they're going to have worked in that area before. And what you'll find is that candidates like this are rare, rarer in certain industries and technologies than others. You will find ICS people quite hard to hire for. Like, I find that's a more niche area in security, doing hardware stuff. You'll find AppSec people who do Java, maybe a little bit easier, And so most security teams are small, only a handful of people. And so, like I said, if companies want to give themselves the best chance of success in the security program, they want to hire these people. And you will find that people in this bracket usually command higher salaries, a little bit better perks because of this, because often there's multiple companies fighting over the same candidates. But it depends on the industry, really. Next is that people with strong security skills who have no or low domain knowledge. And these people, given the right connections, given the right insight, given time to understand, can grow really well. And I think you'll find yourself in this category in your career at least once, if not in your first job, in future ones too. But I do think the worst mistake you can make if you're a security manager is thinking these people don't need coaching. I find it's quite common that you will find, someone who's done security for the government going to a startup. Like I very much did that myself, and you have to change your frame of thinking very fast. The same stuff will not fly, and if you are rigidly following the rules, you'll find yourself sort of not really succeeding in your role. People with high domain knowledge but low security skills are usually career switchers. So it might be someone from IT, it might be someone from procurement, it might be an engineer. And these people are great. Like I've hired lots of people in this category over the years from other teams. You bring them in, and if you pair them with the previous two categories, they can help bring domain knowledge to security knowledge. So pairing them with someone in the bottom right quadrant here that we just talked about, perfect. Like they'll learn off each other, they'll give each other skills. Really great way to grow. And the final one is people with neither, which I mean, hopefully is a new career entrant. But if they're not, maybe you've made the wrong hire, or maybe you're just looking to grow someone into a role very quickly. But we'll see. And so now we understand the industry. I want to talk about what I call multiclassing. So when I was coming up with this talk, I was playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3. And so for those of you who have never played a Dungeons and Dragons game, I'll give you a quick explanation of what multiclassing is in that context. So in these games, you pick a class like fighter, like ranger, like wizard, and you have 20 levels to put in your class and only 20. So every level counts. Now, if you put all 20 levels into fighter, you're going to be a really strong fighter. If you put all 20 levels into ranger, you're going to be really strong with the bows and whatnot. Now, if you multi-class, you distribute them across different classes. So in this case, we have a fighter who's also capable with the bow, maybe not the best, but you've only got 20 levels total. So you've got to make sacrifices, right? So you're maybe not the strongest fighter, not the strongest ranger. And so in theory, multi-classing gives you more versatility, but lowers your overall capacity in a given area. So it means you're less likely to be a true specialist. But, and I've put a star there, versatility can be a specialization. In the context of what I'm talking about, like careers and roles and stuff, you want to be sort of the best fit for a role. You're like the most interesting person in your niche, that kind of thing. And so having this versatility can be a specialization if that's what people are looking for, right? And so I'd argue there's probably more demand for people who can adapt than people who are locked into a specific domain. But you're thinking, Kane, what does this have to do with security? And so let's apply it to our craft. So with the physical version of this talk, I was going to ask people to raise their hand and stuff. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you do anything in the Q&A or anything. But I wanted to give a few examples. So I figured with the Liam's putting his hand up as well. The first example, I'll start you off easy. We've got security engineer combined with a software engineer. Now, do we think this is a good combo? And this has got my seal of approval. Yes. Like a huge chunk of roles in security require coding skills. The ability to build security software is a huge thing. The ability to build paved roads, which is like software that people want to use, the building security into that is just really key in sort of modern day security. Being able to script up sort of scripts for IR activities and things like that, a great boon to have. And so, do I recommend everyone learn to code? No. Do I recommend it for specific domains to increase your skills? Absolutely. And not to mention actually building security products, right? Like who builds CrowdStrike? Who builds SentinelOne? Who builds like all of these tools that we use on the day-to-day? It's software engineers, usually with a bit of security background. So, if you want to get involved in the vendor space, obviously a great way. The next one is a goat farmer. Do we think a goat farmer is a good combination? Probably no. So I've given this one my laughing goat of disapproval. I mean, like, you can certainly try, but I feel like it's too niche, right? Like it's too specialized. How many people work like cybersecurity for goat farming companies? Maybe there's one out there. If you're that person, please message me on LinkedIn. I'd love to know what you do on a day-to-day. But I find that more likely, you'd probably get specialized in ICS systems. You might work in the agriculture sector. They definitely hire a few people. And so you've got to think realistically around what you're combining. But if you do want to goat farm on your personal time, all the power to you. I'd love to do that, to be honest. So now for a bit of a harder one. Security engineer combined with a maritime specialist. Very niche, very, very niche. Do we think it's a good thing? Surprisingly, yes. Like this led me down a rabbit hole when I was researching this. But there are, like you have NIST and sort of certifications and stuff. There is a maritime cyber baseline, and a few countries have this. Basically, what it is it's an ICS certification, but for like boat systems, really. And so, really interesting world. And I'm going to dive into some people who do this later on. But yeah, really interesting area if you want to look into it. I do think the summary here is that most people never multi-class. This is the same in Dungeons and Dragons as it is in the corporate world. And the answer why is just it's complex. There's no immediate benefit most of the time. And it usually takes someone with a bit of a single objective, like you either don't know this exists, you don't know these things are there, or you just don't have the sort of knowledge to get you there in the first place. And so it's often no surprise that people don't do this because it is complicated. And so I've said it's complex. And so why would you do this? And sort of what we talked about earlier is you're more likely to be the perfect candidate for a role. And so some of these niche roles that might exist, like the cyber security for yachts, there's probably going to be in the realm of like 100 to small hundreds of roles worldwide for this. But the people who are skilled in that area are probably going to find roles very quick. But there's, of course, going to be some limitations that we'll talk about later. I do think that a really interesting one is building empathy and understanding with the teams that you work with. So I'm going to talk a little bit around this in my personal journey, but I commonly switch back between leading IT teams, the IT engineering teams, and security teams. And often there's no better way to have empathy for your customers than to be your customer for a little while. And so all that stuff that security people do, vulnerability tickets and stuff like that, if you've experienced it on the other side, you'll understand some of the pain points with it, and then maybe you can go and you can improve it. And so next, we'll be looking into some of the guidance I have around multi-classing, how you can choose to take up the mantle and do it more effectively. I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, should you? Like I said, it's not for everyone. It is complicated. It may not make sense depending on your career goals. So I'm going to try and dive into a little bit of maybe recommendations. So this isn't what I would call an exhaustive list, but these are reasons you would. So you have a specific niche you enjoy. And I might use this a couple times in the talk, but I find it's a very common one. You'll find that people who work at companies like Tesla and Rocket Lab, people who are interested in space stuff, are like really, really passionate about it. And so if you have a niche for that, there's only going to be a few companies you can work with in the world. And so getting skilled in that area and then sort of moving into it in cybersecurity or engineering or whatever sort of area you're in, it's going to give you more chance if you understand the sort of core thing of what the business does. The second is that you like money. There's certain domains that obviously pay more. I find finance is a great example of this. And so again, if you understand finance and you want to do security for finance companies, you're just going to understand it better. You're going to be able to spot things like insider threat, fraud, that kind of stuff a lot easier. You're more likely going to get into those roles. The third is you just want to give back, like non-profits, healthcare, very, very common. Like I did forensics myself, and a very common sort of reason for people getting into that is they want to give back. They want to sort of help their community and that kind of thing. And number four is you just want to increase your resilience. So it's been a pretty tough couple of years, depending on where you are in the world, especially in the tech market. And so, one of the things is, like I said, if you were a software engineer and security engineer, you increase your amount of total available roles. This is going to be more applicable for people in smaller places, like in the UK or the US, for example. There's always tons and tons of jobs, every field imaginable. Here in New Zealand, there's like, 5 million people? We're smaller than London. And so there's just not that many jobs. And so, you might find yourself looking for a SOC analyst role, and there's literally zero. And so are you okay to wait for a while? Potentially. Could you also do something else? Yeah, maybe that's something that you want to do to increase that resilience. And now on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have reasons you shouldn't. So if you want to be a domain expert, you want to be like the best in the world at forensics, best in the world at I don't know, AppSec, then don't multi-class. Like, just keep doing what you're doing. I think the difference here is that the time that you would spend multi-classing, you're going to be spending time researching. You're going to be spending time writing blogs, books, doing research, all sorts of things, right? The fact is that you're still doing the work, you're just doing it in a different area. The next is that you don't have capacity. Like, work is busy, life is busy. Sometimes you just don't have the time to do more. That's fine. I often find myself, it kind of ebbs and flows on how much time I spend on this stuff. And the third is that you've already learned enough. You've already multi-classed. You've already done something. Like, I would maybe doubt this, but again, like, there's only so much you can do. Like, you become a specialist in something after 5 to 10 years of working on it. And so you're going to get diminishing returns after a point. And the last one is you just don't need to. You just don't have a desire. You're kind of happy what you're doing, and that's fine. So if you want to multi-class, how do you get started? And the first is the most extreme. It's probably one of the harder ones to do, but it is the best. And that is, you just take a different role. So if ideally you would do this in your company, and I'll get into a few of the reasons why in a bit, but again, I'm going to use the software engineer example. If you're a security engineer, you want to become a software engineer for a while, maybe you can do a secondment. Maybe you could go over temporarily, 3 months, 12 months. You can learn from the team and then come back with all that knowledge. Or maybe you just do it full time for a year or two. Maybe you go to a different company. Really depends what you're looking for. Two is you can pick up related projects in your current role. A lot of security engineers do other stuff, right? They help in the procurement program. They do a little bit of coding to do some scripts and stuff like that. It's harder because you often don't have someone to learn from, and you don't have the dedicated time to make meaningful progress. And so that's where 3 comes in, just doing it in your own time. I think there's always some sort of element of self-driven learning. And so, if you're going to do 2, maybe pair it with a little bit of 3, you'll probably get almost as good as if you were doing 1. These are my 6 tips for people who are interested in doing multi-classing. I'm not going to go into all of them. I think number 2, 3, and 6 are my sort of standouts. So number 2 is look to see if there is an actual market for this in advance. Look for jobs. If you are geographically limited to one area, you might be limited to all the jobs in that area. So if you wanted to go work for Tesla, and I don't know, you live in Slough, probably not. You're probably going to have to move to Florida or something like that. And so be realistic and do your sort of research first. But I will say that there is also growth, so like if you did AI security 5 to 10 years ago, you might have found a role, but they were probably pretty niche. Whereas today, you could probably find that role wherever you are as a remote job. And so like people are so desperate for AI security engineers that it's not hard to find these. And so you may want to look for growth areas in the future when you're doing your market research, not just how the market looks today, but you are taking a little bit of a risk. So that's number 6, which is take calculated risks. Like security engineers are a safe bunch. We spend all day thinking about risk. And so unsurprisingly, we don't like to take risks. But risk is a good thing. Like companies wouldn't exist if we didn't take risk. You probably wouldn't have a house or, take a mortgage, all of that. And so like risk is a good thing. It's just calculated risk, and everyone has their own variable on what calculated means. Generally, I say for security engineers, be a bit more risky. For everyone else, maybe calm it down. Don't deploy a prod without security review, please. And so number 3 is leverage opportunities unique to you. So you might have a specific location. Like I said, you might live in Florida, so you might be great at working at Tesla, that kind of thing. You might work at a healthcare company, so you might be able to get into that. These are harder for other people, easier for you. Definitely use what you can. And so there's a few recommendations I have when it comes to multiclassing and how you do it. So I don't really think of my career as a bar chart, but this was probably the best way I could visualize this, to be honest. In the first example, we have someone who has switched around. They've done a year as an AppSec engineer, a year as a software engineer, etc., etc. Is this a good pattern? No, absolutely not. The realistic thing is that you want to get at least to a mid-level, ideally a senior engineer first. So if you're constantly jumping around, that's fine if you're looking for like your calling or what you enjoy, and maybe you did these things and you didn't enjoy them. But if you are looking to multi-class, it generally isn't the best approach, because you're not going to become really, really good at AppSec in a year. You're probably going to take 2 to 4 years would be my recommendation. You don't want to go too much because that's a problem that we'll be talking about next. You don't want to do too little either. And the second example isn't a bad thing. Like you may find yourself in this. It's just more of a like something to be aware of, which is if you do 20 years as a SOC analyst and then you do a year as a software engineer and then maybe go back to being a SOC analyst, again, you probably didn't do enough software engineering, but also you probably did too much time as a SOC analyst. Now, maybe you just want to change, and that's fine. But on the next slide, we'll be going back into that. I think the ideal pattern is something like this. So you get to a sort of mid-level to senior engineer, you do 4 years in AppSec, you go over, you become a software engineer for a year or two, you gain that experience, you were already in AppSec, so you probably had a good idea of code. Maybe you weren't coding on the day-to-day, but now you're like really building those skills, you're becoming a good coder, you can build secure things from day one. And then maybe you go back to being an AppSec engineer and you start building those secure paved paths we were talking about. Start building software that people want to use with security built in. And then AI comes along, and so you go take a year of being an ML engineer. You start building security into ML, or you start building things in that realm, almost to bring it back to security. And so what this does is it sort of helps you fix a problem, which is that if you are a senior security engineer, if you're going external, you're probably not going to be a senior developer. You might be able to get a senior developer in your current company with like a lateral move if it's a big one, but you're probably not going to be able to move diagonally or even laterally, because you're probably going to be a much worse coder than you are a security engineer. And so generally, like I was saying, you want to kind of hit this middle point where you're not too senior. You don't want to get a principal AppSec engineer, because then you're probably going to go back down to a base level coder, a junior coder. You're probably going to have to take a lot less money unless you get very lucky. But there are some skills that synergize well, where you might be able to move back and forth. And I think AppSec and stuff is one. We'll be talking about some of those synergies later. But first, I'm going to talk about finding your path. So how do we find the path that's right for you? So there's a concept in games called Fog of War. And the idea of this is that there's a big map. You haven't explored it, so you can't see what's there. So in this example, I think this is Civ 4 or 5. I can't remember which one, but you can only see where you've been. All the rest totally unknowable to you, but you might have some idea of what's out there. So in this case, there's some cities about. And I'm going to apply this to a career and sort of what you're doing. So let's say you get into security, GRC exists, start your thing, you want to get into red teaming. So first you start learning about red teaming and you realize you probably need some IT skills. So maybe you do a degree, maybe you go into help desk, maybe you get some network sort of security skills. And from there, you leverage that to get into your red teaming role. You stay there for a little while, you get fairly senior at it, but you decide you want to start this multiclassing thing. And so maybe you go and become a security engineer, a software engineer, so that you can build automated testing. And this is actually how a lot of startups formed. A lot of the attack surface management startups totally started this way. Like people who got into pen testing, maybe collaborated with coders or became coders with themselves, decided to build a startup based on that. My career has taken me on a bit of an adventure as well. So every few years, I pretty much changed up what I'm doing as well. I think all of these were things that I personally sought out. They were like a change I wanted to make. And so like I started in digital forensics. That's kind of my entry level role into security and IT and that kind of thing. And fun story, actually, Pete on the call hired me into my first job. So we go back a long way. But from there, I decided that digital forensics was slow. It was painful. There was too much manual stuff that annoyed me. And so I became a software engineer focusing on digital forensic processes. I wanted to improve the stuff that was going on. And especially when I worked at the serious fraud office, a lot of what we were dealing with was, petabytes and petabytes and petabytes of data that we needed to review, and you cannot review that manually. And so a lot of what we did was fuzzy searching, keyword searching, that kind of stuff, and building tools to process data so that we could do that. And from there, I felt like I wanted a bit of a change. And so I went over to become an IT security engineer over at Atlassian. So I did that for a year and I got promoted to manager and I did that. And so I was using a lot of the skills that I built in digital forensics in that role anyway. Like a lot of it is hardware security. It's securing laptops, it's securing Mac OS, Windows, Chromebooks, browsers, SaaS tools, like all of this stuff that I've been seeing in years past. And then I decided to make a pretty drastic flip. So I've always been interested in IT. And actually, my sort of first roles were sort of dabbling in sort of doing my own business, running like IT companies. And so I kind of went back to that almost. And so I ran an IT engineering team. And like I say, I was very much on the other side. Like there was a security team I partnered with. So I've been in that role. I kind of knew what they did, but now I was responsible for maintaining the networks and making sure people get their laptops and building software that people want to use in their day-to-day. So it's very different from the security stuff. And so you almost need to keep security in mind, but it's not your primary focus, And I did that for a little while, and then I went back to an IT security manager, and kind of I'm using that experience that I gained to do a little bit of everything. To be honest, it's like helping out our IT team here. It's sort of building the security stuff that I was doing before, and so while it may be similar, it's sort of coming at it from a different angle. And so if we take all these skills that I've learned in all of these roles, this is where I think I kind of am today. Like there's some things I'm good at, there's some things I'm bad at. Like I was a developer so long ago that like all the coding I do is on my home automation setup. Like I don't really code a lot in my day job today. But I still have a lot of those IT skills because there was a synergy with them, right? Like I was doing IT security, then I was doing IT engineering, and then back again, doing very similar stuff. And so, it's easier to move between those roles. And what I found is over the years, kind of my multi-classing journey, I guess, has taken me very much in the IT realm. And I love sort of scale up companies, not startups, not enterprises. I find when I get to the enterprise stage, I get a little bit annoyed at processes and red tape. Like, it reminds me of my government days a little bit too much. And so I like things that are fast moving, but I definitely like having a product that works and has customers. It's like when you're going through SOC 2 and ISO, and just the company is starting to care about security. Like, you're not the single engineer who is trying to do all this stuff themselves at a startup. And so I picked William here as an example as well. I reached out to him on LinkedIn because he is in a very niche role. Like, he started his early career as a sysadmin at like port and maritime companies. And so he liked what he was doing, but he wanted to do more. So he trained up as a pen tester in his personal time. And then eventually he sort of amalgamated these skills, and now he's sort of the CEO of a security consultancy. And a lot of what he does is that maritime security stuff that we were talking about earlier. So things like certifications for super yachts and stuff like that. And so it's like a very weird set of skills where he was in the right industry, doing the right things, learning a bit on his own time, and he sort of brought all of these things together to build his own business and work on a very, very niche area, which I think is super cool. So I've got some final takeaways as we look at ending this talk. And that was, as I mentioned a few times, get good at one thing first. Like, specialists get paid more. You will do better if you do something for 2 to 4 years before you do anything else. So build up that reliable base, use that to improve, and avoid the temptation to, like I said, do too many things or not do one thing enough. Again, as we mentioned, some areas have better synergies than others. AppSec and development we've talked about, IT and enterprise security. There's loads of others too. Like, if you want to work in cybersecurity sales, B2B marketing is what you need to get good at. Not many tools in cybersecurity are customer driven. Like, I am probably not buying many security tools, maybe 1Password or LastPass or something like that. But that's probably it. So most sales happening in security companies is to other companies. So that's what you got to get good at. And there's tons of others, right? Like, you kind of need to make your own path, as I said, but there's also plenty of examples of paths more tread than others, I would say. And so these are kind of the ones that came to mind for me. And do your research. Like I was saying, like, I think you do really need to be realistic. Like you say, you will have your own set of constraints, whether that's location, whether it's time, whether it's the opportunities that you can get. But you can look at different areas, and so there's always different things you can do. I would consider that if you do find yourself having blockers, consider a pivot. Like I said, maybe you really do want to work for space companies, and there were loads of people who wanted to do that in Australia, and there was nothing for many, many years. But now it's kind of a growth area, and they're starting to get more and more in Oz. So it's not impossible. It's just unlikely in certain circumstances. So it is something to consider. I would recommend just looking on LinkedIn for certain jobs. Honestly, just reach out to people. Like, people are so friendly sometimes, where you can just reach out and say, hey, I'm considering doing this. Do you think it's a good idea? What's the experience? And so definitely reaching out and getting insider knowledge is a big win. And you do need to plan your path. Like, if you just start doing stuff, you're going to find yourself getting too confused. And I know a lot of juniors that I've mentored over the years, they get into security and they get into like their specific role as a grad, and they want to do AppSec, and they want to do like red teaming, and then they want to do pen testing, and then they want to do enterprise security. They want to learn all the things, but it doesn't make sense to, quite frankly, unless you are going to go work at a startup as the single security engineer who's going to do everything. It doesn't make sense to do all those things. Like, you're not going to be better at your role. It's not going to be something that's going to be super useful to you. So you can do that if it interests you, but it's not going to have any major benefit. So something I would say is be flexible when you're making your plan. You might build a plan, you might be following it for a while, you might hate it, you might find something that's better. So as GRC people would say, consider it a guideline rather than a standard. And like finding your niche isn't a science, it's a bit of an art. And so most of us probably don't have the skills or the time or the real desire to become like a top red teamer or something like that. Some of us might be able to become the best, I don't know, red teamer who does crypto or has like a very specific niche. And so you can sort of leverage your skills to kind of market yourself a little bit. I do find that's becoming more and more required in sort of like modern day job hunting. And finally, our last slide. Growth happens faster when you leave your comfort zone. Everyone's going to have a different comfort zone, but do know that like growth is hard. Like something I often tell my team is that like if you're struggling, you're probably learning. And so if it's too easy, you're probably not learning fast enough. You're not learning well enough. But everyone's got their own sort of preferences, right? Like I would say my growth zone is pretty big. Like I don't get stressed super easy when I'm taking on a lot of work. Some people might have like a much smaller stress zone. It's a bit of a muscle, I would say, that you have to work. And so it's something you can improve over time. And so don't feel discouraged, especially like, you know, a lot of people want to become red teamers, pen testers. They want to do offensive security, especially when they're younger in their careers. And the reality is there's very few red team roles compared to everything else in security, because the idea is that we want to prevent bad things happening. We don't want to find them and then fix them afterwards. And so it makes sense that security is a funnel with more blue team and then smaller red team. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It just means that if that's something you want, you're probably going to have to put in the work. And so I was a red teamer again for a very, very little period of time, really. I loved it. Most interesting job I had. Couldn't see myself doing it in the long run, to be honest with you. And so that's something that kind of I thought about was maybe a constraint for me. So with that in mind, that's pretty much it. So thanks for coming, everyone, today. Like I say, sorry I couldn't give this one in person, but super enjoyable. And I think I'll be giving this one a few more times as well. So thanks for coming along. Feel free, if you've got any questions, to chuck them in the Q&A, although it looks like Liam might have a few for me now.
I was going to say, we've been collecting a few, and thank you so much for that talk, Kane. It was really insightful, really interesting. As someone who has one foot in the kind of software development and one foot in the security world, it was quite interesting to see all that stuff. So yeah, we've got a few questions. If anyone has any more, please use the Q&A button at the top to ask as we go through them. And the first one is there any benefit to trying to plot your career for a dream job, or find how to link your skills in multiclassing instead?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's funny because I find that, like I said, you can plan for it, and assuming you don't have any constraints like, you know, location, family, etc. You can, but you will find that it might change. So like I find that when I was younger, my dream job was to work at Google, like anyone in tech. And I actually interviewed there and got offered a role that I declined because I found something else better along the way, you know? And so for me, I think the idea of a dream role can change. So don't constrain yourself too much. But I don't think it's a bad idea to have one. And so it's kind of a bit of a cop-out answer, but it depends on you, and it's not a bad choice. It's just don't be so mad to it, because I find the idea of a dream job kind of bad these days, you know, like it's kind of like, I think the dream job for me is like the things I want to be working on, the research I want to be doing, the interesting stuff. And so, you know, while my dream job may have been Google back then, I think I've changed. Google has changed. These things have like diverted, you know, and so that might happen.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. I think, like you say, when you first go into the industry and you're young in your 20s, you've got a lot of time, you've got a lot of focus, but as you get older, you have different responsibilities, and therefore your dream job may change. You might prefer a bit more of a work-life balance or something instead. So
Exactly.
the next question we've got is how do we use multiclassing to attract new people to the industry who are highly skilled and also with transferable skills?
Yeah, I used dev as a very common example, but I think I'll use IT in the example I'm going to give now. So, um, like I said, I've kind of switched between IT and sort of IT security type roles, and I've always hired people from our security team, sorry, from our IT team, into the roles that I'm working in, and often it's people that I see who are commonly working on security incident tickets. You know, like we have a request to disable a laptop because of malware or something like that. And it's always the same person who's in it because they're super interested. And I find those people are people you can like cultivate really well because they they're often looking for something new, you know, like they're looking to get into this. And it's hard to get into security these days as a junior, but like coming up through IT and maybe making a lateral move is a great plan. And like I said, very early on in those slides, the people who don't maybe have great security experience, but have great industry experience, they're just such a great pair to put with new hires with security experience. Like they'll learn off each other, even though they're both relatively junior on your team, perhaps, they'll both sort of build each other's skills. And so I find that's how you can do it in your existing role. But I do think it's just a case of if you are a manager who is hiring, don't knock someone without security experience, you know, because I have seen software developers who are like so interested in security that they spend their spare time like fixing bugs in open source software and stuff, you know. And so people like that are very rare, but incredible to work with.
So that's kind of an interesting point to leave that at, because the next question is about like people who work in security with development skills and how that works with communicating between those like dev and engineering teams. In kind of your experience or in your world, do you find it's much easier to like push things to them, or do you think you get a lot more pushback when you have less technical skills?
Good question. Like I find having someone with dev experience in the team helps because they're often a little bit more attuned to maybe what the dev teams feel. And so like I used vulnerability scanning as a great example, you know, like I know a lot of companies just scan a bunch of stuff, make a bunch of tickets, developers go out and fix it. And developers often push back, going like, why am I fixing this thing in a code path that doesn't exist? It's code we're going to delete in 6 months. Do I really need to fix it? And like all of this stuff is things security engineers might not be aware of. And I'm not saying you need a perfect vulnerability scanning solution, but it's stuff that may not immediately clock in your brain when you're working on this stuff unless you have someone on the team who does it day to day. And so it's great to have those people in the team. And like I do think that you can sort of use them as a first customer, but don't get into the idea that they're like the only person you need to go to. Like every dev team is different. So don't be like, oh yeah, we talked to the dev in our team. He said it will be good. And off you go, you know.
Okay. How kind of important are soft skills such as communication, especially, and kind of how you adapt it as well, depending on who your audience is, who you're talking to?
Yeah, interesting one. I find that probably most roles require a minimum bar when it comes to soft skills. And it's something you can improve on, but I do find it's something people don't, if that makes sense. So it's much easier and more fun, quite frankly, to get better at your craft. Like you can learn a new skill, you can have that feedback that you've learned a new language, or you've done a new security certification. It like gives you those endorphins, and it's very measurable. It's very like easy to feel like you are progressing. But when it comes to soft skills, it's really hard to know that you're improving. It's not as measurable, and you have to keep doing it. Like one of the things I do is conference talks, for example, and I don't do conference talks super often. I maybe do 3 to 5 a year, but I try and keep that up, because if I just don't do it for a year, those skills are gone, and then it's hard to get them back, And so, like I say, for most security roles, you're going to require some soft skills. I would say that is a weakness of a lot of security engineers. Just make sure you put the time in to improve it, and sort of there might be roles where they're less applicable, but I would say there isn't anywhere where there's none. Like even if you're a pen tester working in a room on a product by yourself, 24/7, you're probably still going to need to communicate your results to a customer or your manager, and the better you do that, the better it is, really.
Okay, so all of those first questions were anonymous, but we've finally got somebody who wants to put the name to it. So we've got Mohammed, who first wants to thank you for talking to the Exeter students. So I assume he's from the uni. He says he loves blockchain and wants to help secure it. What role as an MSc in cybersecurity should you first get into?
Oh yeah, great question. I have a few friends who are into this area, and so none of them came from a particularly dedicated path. Like some were AppSec, some were enterprise security, some were a bit like even program managers and the likes. I think it's just one of those cases where, like I said, like that is a great example of an industry vertical that you need to have some experience with, because if you took a security engineer who knows nothing about crypto and you put them in a crypto company, they're probably going to need to do a lot of learning very quickly. Probably the best, though, would be application security. So I would do a security degree. I would learn to code while I was doing that, and I would learn secure coding. Those would be the skills that I would really focus down on. Additionally, in your spare time, I would learn a little bit about crypto functions, stuff like that, NFTs, all of that business. Like there's so many areas of crypto, from like NFTs and gaming to sort of more blockchainy database stuff to the more finance aspects. So again, like maybe just try and dabble, learn a little bit of each, and don't overwhelm yourself, because it is a lot.
Cool. Okay. I think we're just on to the last question, and it's from me actually. I'm just interested to see, in kind of getting to your kind of like your career path in your, say, dream career, how important do you think it is to kind of do that in public? So what I mean is like how much of a role do you think kind of social media, LinkedIn, like people going on podcasts, doing talks, writing blogs, how much do you think that can benefit somebody, especially when, if you're going for like a job interview and people look at that first? Can it be a big benefit?
Yeah. Daniel Miesler, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a great blog on this. It's called let me see if I've got it here. It's called How to Build a Cybersecurity Career 2019 update. I'll even chuck it in the chat for those of you who are, oh no, it's off. Maybe not. But great blog from him. I think it was written first in like 2013 or something, many, many, many years ago. I think there's really two aspects to getting a job or changing careers or getting into something new. One is getting into the interview stage, and two is getting through the interview, right? And so doing public stuff will help you get to the interview. And something I always tell students is like write a blog or something, and people often be like, but no one's going to read it. Well, trust me, like if you put a link to it on your resume, I will read it, and one of the students I hired some years ago had a blog not really about security. It was just like they worked in AV and they liked to reverse engineer all the props and stuff that they did. And it was so interesting. Like it was hacker mindset, like turned up to 11, like, and it was really great to see that. And it made me immediately want to go talk to that person. And we hired them pretty shortly after. And so do you have to do it? No. Is it going to make your life easier? Yes. Could that time also be spent on something better? Also, yes. And so really depends what you're doing. Like if you find you're consistently getting interviews into the roles that you want, it's up to you. If you enjoy it, do it. If you don't bother. But like I say, it can also be useful to move. Like I was saying, like one of the big points I had in my talk was a senior security engineer is not a senior developer. Like it's just not an equal thing. However, if you have GitHub where you are coding open source stuff, or a blog where you're writing about the things that you're building, then maybe you are. And so you're more likely to be able to do a lateral move if you talk about that stuff. And so I do encourage people to sort of publish and do public stuff, even a little bit, to give people an idea of kind of what you're into.
Cool, that's a great answer. We've actually had one more question sneak in before, actually. So we've got Kerry, who asks, as a CISO and extremely multi-classed, including being a salesperson as well, what do you think about the need for multiple experiences to climb the ladder?
Depends on what you want to do at the end of the day. Like if you do want to be a CISO or a CIO or something, you're gonna have to you will find cases of security engineers who have joined startups and then have been the most tenured person, and then they've gotten their role as the CISO, and they do fairly well at it. And I find that those examples are rare because the person was given a chance. First of all, they were given that slow time as the company grows to also grow with it and gain those skills. But more commonly, you'll find that people will hire external and they need a lot of this stuff in the first place to just as a minimum bar of entry into the role. And so you probably will have to do a little bit of it if you want to get into management, or if you want to become like a really strong individual contributor in a different area. Again, is it necessary? Should everyone be a CISO? No, that shouldn't really be the goal of everyone. I know everyone wants to be, but often you'll find that you'll get to that point, you make a lot of decisions, you're basically the fall person for the company scapegoat if there's an incident. And so I do know several people who have either become like a manager or a director, done it for a year, hated it, gone back, and then those people are really great to manage because they've done it, they've experienced it, and they know the other side. But don't be afraid to try at the end of the day. Like I find those people, even though they went into that manager experience, they didn't like it. They probably came out the other end better for it, learning that it's something they wanted to do. Maybe they didn't enjoy it. Maybe it wasn't for them. At the end of the day, it's all a learning experience.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time, Kane. It's been a brilliant talk. I'm sure absolutely everybody's appreciated it. I'm going to pass over to Liam now to close it up.
Thank you, Adam. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending this talk. Looking forward to seeing you in 25 for our next event, which is on the 26th of April. Watch this space about a special extra day coming up. That's all I've got to say. Nice and short one from me this evening.
One last thing to jump in.
Yeah.
Based on what Kane said, if you want to do something a bit more public and you want to get some do a talk on something, we will be having a call for papers, so you can first time talk, do it at B-Sides Exeter if you want to get out there and support the local local industry.
definitely. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Much appreciated.